All right, well, hello again, everybody. My name's Andrew here with my colleagues Crystal, Sister M. Catherine, as well as Praise. And today we are going to discuss the question of how health and infrastructure development affect economic output in the African region. This is going to be a data story that starts with very small and specific variables and zooms out over time to overall economic performance across the African region. This information is intended for the use of potential policymakers, government officials, as well as macroeconomists. So, a little background. We felt there may potentially be some trends that illustrate that focusing on individual health and investing in modern infrastructure may allow African countries to better their economic performance. And here we are measuring economic performance as GDP, gross domestic product. So, committing more funds, we felt, to health expenses per capita may lower infant mortality and therefore, as a result, increase life expectancy. And through that lower infant mortality and increased life expectancy, we expected that we might find a higher population as well as a higher potential energy usage across nations, which will overall lead to higher GDP. So, some key terms just to go over infant mortality, that is the death of an infant before their first birthday. Life expectancy, that's the average number of years a person is expected to live. Health expenditure per capita, that is the sum of private and public health expenditure divided by total population. Energy usage is the kilogram of oil equivalent per capita, basically just converting any primary energy source to the common energy scale by oil. And then, of course, we have GDP, that is gross domestic product in a country over 1 year. All right, so in our first visual here, we wanted to see if we could find a potential correlation between life expectancy and infant mortality. So on the y-axis here, you can see we have infant mortality, and then on the x-axis, we have average life expectancy of females across the African region by country on the left, and then for males on the right. And what we found is that there is actually a negative correlation between infant mortality rate and life expectancy across nations in the African region, meaning that as infant mortality rate decreases, you can expect to see average life expectancy increase for a country across time. And with that, on the topic of infant mortality rate and life expectancy, I want to pass it right over to my associate sister, M. Catherine.
Thank you, Andrew. On this dashboard view here, we have that graph that showed the life expectancy and infant mortality correlation, coupled with a chart that is showing the comparison between the health expenditures per capita and what that does with the infant mortality rate. And you can see that it is true that countries that do spend more on health expenditures do have a lower infant mortality rate, and that corresponds as well to the scatter plots below so that we can see nations that are able to spend more in that healthcare are able to have a healthier population in terms of greater life expectancy, lower infant mortality rate. Our next question we wanted to look at is, do countries with higher urban populations emit more carbon dioxide? Kind of looking at concentration of populations and what that's doing in terms of energy usage that would cause the CO2 emissions, as well as how that could possibly affect an overall well-being of the country. And we can see that in this relationship chart with the map, the gradient shows the um, urban populations, which countries have higher urban populations, and the dots show the CO2 emissions. And so there's a loose correlation, but not as strong as you would expect. Some of the darker countries have higher, but not the highest. So it's loosely correlated, but not as much as we were kind of expecting. And then in this graph, our next question is what is the correlation between energy usage, population, and the GDP per country? And so this is a relationship chart as well. So you can see that countries toward the right are using more energy, and the larger bubbles also show the larger populations. And they also have the larger GDP. So there is a correlation here between population, GDP, and energy usage. And our final question is how has the GDP grown in relation to the population over time in the African region? And again, this is a relationship chart, and it does show that as the economic output has increased, so has the population. So there is kind of a direct correlation there as we see that population is a major factor in growth for a country's GDP. And with that, I'd like to send it back to Andrew.
All right, thank you very much for that. Very much appreciated. In conclusion, we are able to see that investments and buildup of human capital have improved overall economic output, especially through health and infrastructure. So we found correlation between low infant mortality and higher health expenditure across Africa. We also found a negative correlation between infant mortality and life expectancy. So better funding healthcare can definitely lead to less mortality, as well as a higher population over time. We also found that areas with higher populations often do emit more carbon dioxide and use more energy. And there is a correlation between energy use, GDP, and population. So all goes to say that investing into health expenditure definitely can lead to longer lives and a higher population. And countries with larger populations do use more energy, even at the expense of possible higher CO2 emissions. And they also do have larger GDPs as a result many times as well. So, some potential recommendations for those policymakers, government officials, macroeconomists, etc. The first would be to prioritize primary or preventative care. This is definitely something that can possibly lead to lower infant mortality rates and a healthier population, which will increase population over time and give a country an opportunity to increase its overall GDP and economic output. A second recommendation would be to focus on renewable and clean energy, especially either hydro, solar, or wind power, because as we talked about before, large CO2 emissions are pretty common amongst the higher populations. And although they are linked to more energy usage and ultimately higher GDP, that may not be quite so sustainable in the long run for growth in a country. So focusing on renewable energy definitely is something that can help a country sustain itself long term. And lastly, quite simply, a country investing heavily in its own human capital, especially through education, skills, and health, will give it a great chance to continue growing its GDP over time. Large populations still do need know-how, skills, and ability to continue contributing to itself and finding economic success in the long run. And with that, I'd like to thank you very much for your time and wish you a great rest of your day.